If you've got a newer gen WR250F, the 2020 to 2023 model, you know how awesome these bikes are. But there's a few things you can do to customize it and elevate it to the next level in the Aussie bush. We're going to run you through our tips and tricks as well as the few little bolt-on parts we've done. Stay tuned. Alright, if you're watching this video, you know how epic these WR250Fs are. For the Aussie bush, they're bloody an awesome all-round bike. There's a few areas where this bike can be improved. Being a bike that's registerable out on the road, they do come slightly choked up. So starting with a few parts we added, we started with a YZ/FX muffler. We went for this muffler because simply we wanted to go for a budget build. So you can pick one of these up on Gumtree, secondhand. A lot of guys pull them off their YZs and smack an aftermarket system on there. So the cool thing is a lot of people sell them off. These mufflers are built for this engine. This engine's based quite heavily around the YZ, so paired together, they work really, really well. That in combination with what we went with here is a GYTR Powerflow airbox kit. As you can see, this airbox sits a little bit higher than stock and it runs a totally different filter inside. So not only is the filter bigger and lasts longer in dustier conditions, we found anywhere from an extra ride and a half. The design of this filter and the filter cage is a lot more geared towards performance. It doesn't have a backfire screen in it, so it allows more airflow through, and the bigger airbox also increases more power. That paired with jumping on the app and fiddling with the mapping, I'll link in the description below the mapping that we've run with Aussie Fuel. Those three together completely unleashed this bike. We ran it stock for about 30 hours. We've got about 55 on it now. We wanted to run it as stock as possible to just get a good feel for it. But where it did lack was that little bit off the bottom. Now it's totally different. It doesn't feel like a YZ, like it's real racy. It's still got that really smooth, manageable power, but not only can you loft it over logs or pull yourself out of holes a lot easier, you can now run a gig taller. So overall, these couple of mods, although not super expensive, did a lot for this bike. This bike comes so good standard that it doesn't take much to unlock this awesome engine. While we're on the topic of performance, another major thing that you should really look into doing with your WR is your tyre choice. Come stock, the DOT approved FIM tyres are pretty good. Like, we've kind of got in the habit in the past of getting a stock bike and ripping the tyres off and putting what we like on it straight away, but this time we specifically spent about 30 hours on this bike stock to feel what it's really like, but that before bolting a few parts on and changing our tyres. So we've run a couple of sets of tyres on this bike. We've run the Maxxis MXIH Max Cross tyres, which are intermediate to hard tyre, but they're quite gummy. So they've been super impressive. And we've also run the Michelin Starcross 6 range. So we've run the mid-soft as well as the mid-hard range. Those two different brands of tyres are quite different. The Maxxis, you wouldn't think they'd be grippy in all conditions being an intermediate hard, but it was quite surprising how good these tyres were in pretty much everything. We did a race that had absolutely everything in it and they really shined. Downside to these tyres, they don't last as long as the Michelins. So the new Michelins are a different rubber compound. They got as much grip as the Starcross 5s if you ran them, but they last a fair bit longer. So we ran those Michelins for majority of the time on this bike and really enjoyed them. If you want to learn more about the Michelin Starcross 6 range, we've recently did a tyre review with Josh Green. So check out the link in the description below and you can dive deep into those tyres and why we really like them. But as far as putting some aftermarket tyres on your bike, it's the best way to improve your bike's handling by far. And these two choices of tyres are what we recommend. Like we said before, we wanted to keep this build really budget. This bike, straight out of the box, is an absolute ripper. But there's a few things that are kind of non-negotiables. So Yami's stock grips, in our mind, no good. We didn't wait 30 hours to rip them off like we did with most of the other stuff. They were pretty much off straight away. They're really hard, they're just not a nice feel. So we're running some Pro Taper race cut, half waffle, soft, glue on grips with a little bit of wire to hold them down. And I dare say, apart from being a little bit harder to fit, they're a lot more comfier and they're lasting really well. Not having that plastic lock-on sleeve in there, you have way more density to your grips, but they're no fatter. So you're not having these big fat grips as standard, but way more comfort, less arm pump, more forgiving out on the trail, and so far they're lasting longer than lock-on grips because there's more to them. So do yourself a favor, ditch the Yami grips, cut them off, get them off, and run something like these Pro Tapers, or even the lock-ons are pretty good. One of the best things about a Yami is they're built to last. If you've ever had one, you know that Yamaha doesn't release anything that's not super robust and designed to last. They're not the quickest to the market, but they make sure their stuff is sorted before it gets out there. This bike is pretty near bulletproof. We've pretty much whipped it out of the shed, made sure the filter's good, filled it up and just go. And that's been really awesome, not having to worry about the life of certain parts. Chains and sprockets, brake pads, wheel bearings have all, fork seals have all really stood the test of time at 50 hours. We replaced a set of brake pads and a front sprocket, but the rest have been really reliable. One thing that we tend to err on the side of caution is radiators. Pretty easy to fall over in your side and disinline your radiators, or if you're real unlucky, you can bust them up. So we fitted some GYTR radiator braces, and what we really like about these radiator braces is they're super sleek. So they bolt off the frame, just brace the radiators so they can't twist, can't really fold on themselves, and they're not a crazy amount of extra weight. They're not in the front of your radiator, so they're catching more leaves and debris and grass if you ride a bunch of grass track. They're really sleek, really non-expensive addition to your bike, but also give you that peace of mind when you do drop it on its side that you're not going to bust your radiators. All right, so that's what we've added in the way of parts. Not much at all, not highly expensive, not a bunch of overkill, no bling bits, just functional things that we think really improve the way this bike performs and handles. A couple of things we want to talk to about setup. So I'm a little bit on the taller side, about 6'2", and I did a few things to this bike that I feel like made it a little bit more comfortable for me. So up front, you've got two handlebar positions. We decided to put them in the front holes, which isn't something we normally lean towards, but it does open up that cockpit a little bit more and give you a bit more room to move around on the bike. Another setup tip we learned from Josh Green: we jump on these bikes and yes, they've got a cable clutch, and a lot of bikes these days have got a hydraulic. Just move your levers in. So as you'll see on our bike, we've moved our clutch lever in a fair bit so that when you reach up and grab your clutch lever, you're grabbing the very end of it. So I use 2 fingers for using my clutch on a cable clutch like this one, and my second finger is right up against the end of the lever where the ball is. So you move your lever that far in. It also means you've got to switch the configuration of your controls up here, but we took the opportunity to put our kill switch closer to the grip and put our map switch a little bit further in as well. So a little bit of jigging around there, but it really does make a difference to the clutch feel. Jumping off bikes with hydraulics and cable, now that you've got it set in the right position, it really doesn't feel any heavier. I like the feel of it. It wears really well. It's got the adjustability on it. So it's been really good. And it's also out of the way. So if you have a stack, you're less likely to bend or bust your levers when they're pushed in. Also, as all bikes really work on your lever position, we like to run them in a nice neutral position, just so when your hands rest just down on it, don't have them too far down, don't have them too far up. It really affects the way you ride. A little niggle with this bike is it still doesn't love starting. Being electric start only, it can be a little bit of a hassle when you're out in the bush, stuck on a hill or something like that. So there's a few little tricks. On the throttle housing, you've got on the rubber that goes around it, you've got 2 little indicators. On the stock grip, you've got a line that you'll see it, but like I said, change up your grips and you'll enjoy it. If you give it a tiny bit of throttle as you hit the button, the bike fires up a lot quicker and you won't be sitting there repetitively going for it on a hill, something like that. It does like being in neutral. That's its happy place for starting. But if you can't get it started, say you've come up a hill in third, fourth gear and hit a rock and got a bit swirly and stalled it, just click down a couple of gears. Doesn't really matter what you're in, but closest to neutral the better, and the bike seems to start a lot nicer there. It's a bit of a bugger, like it is super reliable. We haven't had a battery die on us or anything like that. It's always been there when you need it, but it's just a little bit finicky. This suspension on this bike is really, really good for anything where you feel like you're going a lot harder into an obstacle, which sounds weird for a WR. This is the closest the suspension's ever felt to a motocross bike, but has been valved specifically for the bush, so it feels really quite good. One thing we like to do is put a cable tie around the lower stanchion. That's just a cool way to see how much trouble you're using out on a ride. If you're not using 2/3 to 3/4 to even all of your suspension, it's kind of a bit of a waste. So just a little tip for dialing in your suspension, as well as it's really important to set your sag when you get a new bike or you buy a second-hand bike. Everyone weighs a different amount. I'm right in that kind of sweet spot, luckily, for this bike, that 75 to 80, 85 kilos. So the standard spring suits me quite well. And I was able to get 105mm of rider sag on this bike, and it handles amazingly. If you can't quite get that 105, you might need to go to a lighter shock, or if you're a bit of a heavier set guy, go to a heavier spring. It's well worth doing.